We have a surprise player who is reportedly interested in possibly coming to the Panthers. We're going to discuss that and more on this Thursday, July 21st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, July 21st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando from PantherParkway.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Monoman12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. And thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL will be covering all the off-season activities around the National Hockey League. So, Cats fans, it's crazy sometimes how the off-season, the ups and downs, and seeing who's reportedly interested in going where and who's not. And just about 2 p.m. yesterday was when a report from The Athletic sent out a list of teams that would possibly be interested in Calgary Flames winger Matthew Tkachuk. And at the beginning of this offseason, I would have never thought that Matthew Tkachuk would have even been available for I thought that he was going to be signing an extension, him along with Johnny Gaudreau, and look what happens. Johnny Gaudreau signs with the Columbus Blue Jackets, going out east for family reasons. And if you get an opportunity to read the article from Players Tribune, his open letter from the Players Tribune, you get to see more of the human side of why Johnny Gaudreau made the decision that he made, and good for him. I'm happy for Johnny Gaudreau. So now there leaves Matthew Tkachuk. At the beginning of the offseason, I thought that the Calgary Flames were going to be able to sign both of them. They do have the cap space to sign both of them. But of course, seeing your buddy that you shared a line with go, and now there's a little bit of uncertainty up in Alberta. So now with Tkachuk, there's interest in him possibly going to quite a few teams. And this was first reported by The Athletic, but then it was shut down later by another reporter. I'll get to The Athletic report first. So Matthew Tkachuk would sign a long-term deal in St. Louis, Vegas, Florida, Nashville, and Dallas. And then there was a tweet later on in the day talking about how the reports of those 5 teams is not accurate. And this is a reporter that is based in Calgary. His name is Eric Francis. So maybe the exact list of those 5 teams aren't accurate, but there could be 1 or 2 that could be. But I guess that tweet means those exact 5 and nothing else. That's what I read into that. But listen, as I was arriving home from my day job and seeing that report of Tkachuk possibly being interested in going to the Panthers, I just looked at my phone like this. For those of you seeing on the YouTube, you could see it. And I just let a big old smile on my face. Why is that? Is that the Florida Panthers continue to be a destination franchise for players to want to come here. And we've seen that in the last few years with Jumbo Joe Thornton, even though he was way past his prime and in his early 40s. And Claude Giroux most recently. wasn't expecting Giroux to be on the trade block last season. And look what happened. He ended up in Florida. Sure, they didn't win the cup, but the fact that they were able to get him and that there was interest in him to come down here is just great to see. And just when it comes to Tkachuk and the Panthers, I really don't know how realistic a trade is. I'll just say that right off the bat. I don't know how realistic it is. But it gives me a good sense of direction continuously with this team, that they are going to continue to be an attractive destination. But there's still work to do, still, to continue that reputation and continue to want to be a place where people want to come. Because, that perception can change real quick. You miss the playoffs and all that can go right out the window. Or even if you make the playoffs and you get embarrassed in round one, that can very well go out the window as well. So that's what the Panthers, regardless of whether they bring Matthew Tkachuk in or not, they got to make sure that they continue to prove to the hockey world that they are a destination franchise. And my mindset going into a possible trade for Matthew Tkachuk is a zero expectations approach. I'm just going to sit back, enjoy the ride, and if Bill Zito happens to pull this off, we'll be emotionally popping some bottles here, emotionally. But it'll be, we spoke about championship window with the Panthers and how right now it seems to be a 1 to 2 year window for this team. Matthew Tkachuk at 24 years old extends that big time. So what's it going to take for the Panthers to try to get him? It's not going to come cheap for them, first of all. We're going to discuss that next on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Built Bar. And from the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given coconut brownie chunk the puffs treatment. That's right. The coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling and listen. They're good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, all delicious. Coconut brownie chunk puffs are only here for a limited time. Go to Built.com now to make sure you don't miss out. They are going fast because they taste amazing. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently. Provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good, and it's good for you. The best part about Built Puffs is, of course, they taste amazing. But you can enjoy them guilt-free because they're actually good for you. They're the same treat, perfect when you have a craving, you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or if you need a quick, healthy snack. They are an excellent source of protein. Delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing and get to Built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Continuing this conversation on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and let's continue the conversation about Matthew Tkachuk. And let's first of all discuss what his RFA status looks like. And these are a few tweets from the actual cap-friendly Twitter page about him going to salary arbitration, which, by the way, no Florida Panthers have filed for salary arbitration. The only player left on the Florida Panthers that have RFA rights that needs to work out a contract is Henry Bolby, and looks like that's going to be something that's going to be announced soon as far as the terms and the money. Don't expect a I don't expect a big cap hit for Henry Bolby, so nothing to worry about for us Cats fans, and no salary arbitration for Bolby. But going back to Matthew Tkachuk, here's a tweet from Cap Friendly: is Matthew Tkachuk has 6 accrued seasons and therefore 1 year away from UFA. If the Flames / Tkachuk go before an arbitrator, he'll be awarded a 1-year deal that cannot be less than $9 million. Flames can still trade him before he goes to arbitration, but new team inherits the filing. Second part of it says Flames can still negotiate a new contract with Tkachuk up until his arbitration date. However, negotiations are no longer permitted once the hearing begins. Flames could also sign and then trade him. Accepting his qualifying offer or signing an offer sheet are no longer an options. So that's the thing. The Flames are protecting themselves from losing more than just Tkachuk and not getting the proper assets for them. So that means in a possible trade, they're going to be asking for a lot for Matthew Tkachuk, which the Florida Panthers have already given up quite a bit in this most recent trade deadline. So it's going to be a little harder. But also, a move for Matthew Tkachuk has got to make sense in their present and their future. And like that tweet said, he's not going to have a deal less than $9 million. It's going to be a little hard for the Panthers, right? And present and future. It makes sense for their future a year from now with a lot of cap opening up. But if you're Matthew Tkachuk, you're looking for some term right now. Even at 24 years old, nobody wants to go through UFA status multiple years. So people want to get locked up so that they can go into an offseason at ease, go on vacation, spend time with their families, and not have to worry about these. I mean, look at Geno Malkin about what he went through during his negotiation. I know he's been around for a long time, but that's just an example of this offseason specifically. So it's got to make sense financially in the now for the Panthers. So what would that mean? That would mean, obviously, Patrick Hornquist is part of that trade. You'd have to get. I think their asking price would be at least 3 first-round picks. This is a former 6 overall pick from the 2016 draft, in the same draft as Austin Matthews, and they're gonna ask for quite a lot. And necessarily trading for Huberdeau doesn't necessarily make the most sense, in my opinion. We know what the clear problems of this team is, and the clear holes of it are on the right side. Matthew Tkachuk mostly played on the right side with Johnny Gaudreau, with Elias Lindholm manning the middle. You would be taking a part of the team that is pretty solid on that side and holes on the right-hand side, and then just flipping them. Benefit is, if you were to pull that off, is you're getting a younger version of Huberdeau and a guy who scores more goals. But again, this has to make sense in the present and the future. And this isn't saying that I'm for a trade of Tkachuk for Huberdeau. But you're also going to have to possibly part ways with a Denisenko, a Lundell, which Bill Zito has a big emotional attachment to Lundell, with that being his very first draft pick. There could be Mackie Samoskevich could be part of that as well, who looked like very NHL ready during his time at development camp, according to the people who were there in person, and a 2025 first, something along those lines. And the assets or lack thereof is going to make this a little harder to pull off. However, if they do pull it off, we celebrate regardless, because this is a generational high-profile player that's coming to your franchise that is going to extend that window. But once again, it has to fit into your present and your future as well. And with this offseason approach that Bill Zito has had, it maintains some of that flexibility even for next year to make a splash, even if you re-sign a Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. Still work to do with having to trade the contract of Sergei Bobrovsky, but there's still ways to fit a possible bigger move next offseason. It's just about how cap-strapped the Panthers are right now, and the fact that Matthew Tkachuk isn't going to get anything under 9 makes it a little hard for the Panthers. I would love Matthew Tkachuk on this team. I'd be over the moon if they bring him in. 24 years old, got 100 points for the first time in his career just recently. That is and his best years are ahead of him. So finding a way to get him here is something that I'd be very excited about. But we also got to be a little realistic here. And trading Tkachuk for, as well as putting, let's say, packaging Weegar in it, you still put a little bit of holes on the defensive part of the team as well, unless you're asking for someone back on their end who's NHL ready to play, and maybe a late draft pick as well. I mean, they've done a trade before where when they traded for Sam Bennett, of course you're not going to trade as high as draft capital. You weren't going to trade as much draft capital for Sam Bennett as you would right now for Matthew Tkachuk. That's just the truth. But you would hope to get at least a later round pick as well, along with that, to maintain some of that flexibility as well. I don't know if it happens, but a great situation for the Panthers to be in, that they are continuing to be that destination franchise, again, if you're Bill Zito, make the call, see what's out there for Brad Treliving, and see what his asking price is, and go back, reevaluate, and see if this makes sense for your team. Because if you're going to bring Matthew Tkachuk in, he's going to be here for a while, because he's likely going to sign a 7-year deal, taking him all the way to his age 31 season. So you pick up the phone. Again, it's going to be hard to pull it off, but it's just exciting thinking about it. And that's why I have a zero expectations approach. If by this time tomorrow we hear that Matthew Tkachuk is traded somewhere else that's not Florida, you just put your hands up and just say, okay, we move on. And the Panthers still got to get to work on trying to prove that there's still that destination. In the next segment, we are going to discuss where I ultimately think that Matthew Tkachuk is going to end up next season. Shall he be traded from the Calgary Flames? We're going to discuss that more on the third and final segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Thursday, July 21st edition of Locked On Panthers. And like I said, if those teams that were listed from The Athletic happen to be those actual teams, there's a lot of he said, she said during this time of the offseason. And, sometimes a little bit of ruffling the feathers here for these GMs. And let's just, for the sake of argument, for this exercise and for these teams specifically that were listed, what makes the most sense for Matthew Tkachuk on where to go? And I think of all the teams that he could be going to, I think St. Louis makes the most sense because most of his childhood was being raised in St. Louis with his dad, Keith Tkachuk, playing for the St. Louis Blues for 7 years from 2001 to 2007. Was born in Arizona when Keith played for the Phoenix Coyotes at the time. And I look at the St. Louis Blues cap situation, and there's still kind of relationship problems, at least reportedly, out in public from Vladimir Tarasenko and the St. Louis Blues. And he has a year left on his contract with a cap hit of 7.5. Like I said, Matthew Tkachuk is likely going to make 9 starting next season. They still got to find a way to re-sign Ryan O'Reilly, who helped them get to a Stanley Cup just a few years ago. Their captain, was not the captain at the time, but now is. Extensions of Robert Thomas is going to kick in next season for the Blues. But Vladimir Tarasenko at age 30, it seems from the outside that relationship is something that those two sides need to move on from, based on various reports on how the medical staff has handled Tarasenko's health. And the St. Louis Blues do have the assets, the cap flexibility later on for their team. They don't have too many expiring contracts next season, of course. Jordan Kyrou bursted on the scene last season, playing in the middle six, and you put Tkachuk right in that for them on that top line, replacing Tarasenko, and then Jordan Kyrou is on that second line right wing. It makes a lot of sense for the St. Louis Blues to make this trade. You dish out his 7.5, and you gotta, for the St. Louis Blues, they'll have to probably make one more move in order to try to make it work, and maybe trade as well, like an Ivan Barbashev as well, to create that space for Matthew Tkachuk, who's going to be a pending UFA come next season. And even a vet, they could even do it for a veteran as well, in Brandon Saad, who has term on his contract. Brandon Saad has 4 more years on his deal. Stanley Cup champion Brandon Saad, who's approaching 30 years old as well, and you're getting someone out there for a younger 24-year-old in Matthew Tkachuk, who, again, 100 points for the first time in his career for the 6th overall pick back in 2016. Vegas over the last few years have become, from one of the most liked teams, easily one of the most hated teams in the NHL. There's no denying that. They dished out Max Pacioretty for nothing after giving up so much to get him. Tomas Tatar as well, Nick Suzuki, all in that trade. And if you combine the Tomas Tatar and Nick Suzuki trade, the amount that Vegas has given up just to try to win now, only for them to fall flat on their face. Sure, they have Jack Eichel and Mark Stone on their team as well, but the team continues to be a little cap ignorant. And even next season for Vegas, they don't have too many expiring contracts, but they only have a less than $5 million in cap space even for next season. And one of those expiring contracts is a former 2nd overall pick in Nolan Patrick, and they got to see what they got in him too. After trading him in a 3-way trade with Philly and Nashville for Ryan Ellis and Cody Glass, they got to figure out what they have in him. So Vegas doesn't seem to me that makes really a lot of sense cap wise for Vegas. Dallas, though, let me see what their cap situation looks like. They could very well fit him in right now without having to trade too much away. obviously never mind. They still got to pay Jake Ottinger and Jason Robertson, who was part of the solution of their team, and those are likely going to take them to the cap ceiling. And of course we just saw them sign Mason Marchment just now. And the contracts that are holding them back consistently are those of Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin. Tyler Seguin has had a little bit of an injury history at $9.8 million too, which is really hard for Stars fans to swallow with 5 years left on that deal. A Jamie Benn contract would likely be a lot easier to move for them cap-wise, but both Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn have no move clauses on their contracts. So a little harder to move them, and they got to prove of a trade too. So Dallas is going to be a little hard for them to get a Matthew Tkachuk because they got to pay Robertson and Ottinger, and it's likely with $11 million in cap space right now, it's going to take them likely to that cap ceiling. The Nashville, they just signed Philippe Forsberg to a new deal, so they're gonna be right up there. And right now they have $8 million in cap space right now, so they could actually they only have one RFA left to sign, which is Yakov Trenin, 25-year-old left wing / center. So they could very well fit Matthew Tkachuk in immediately on their team as well. And of course, and they have the draft capital. They have a first and a second in the next 3 years, along with multiple 3s, multiple 4s as well next season. So they could package that in to bring a Matthew Tkachuk. And though they'll have a lot of expensive contracts on their books in the next few years, they'll be still in at least in a competitive window. And what David Poile has done, as a lot of us from the outside saying that the Predators should rebuild, they have found a way to consistently continue to be in the postseason over and over and over again. It hasn't got them back to the Stanley Cup final like they were in 2017, but they continue to give themselves more cracks at it for getting into the postseason. I don't know how much a trade for Ryan McDonough takes them over that top. Takes them over the top as a guy who's 33 years old, coming into their team. But hey, he's still a reliable defenseman that can mentor a pretty young group over there in Nashville. Not the youngest group, but a good around the mid part of that, just over the average age. So a pretty veteran heavy group, but not too old, not like Pittsburgh Penguins old and Boston Bruins. So the Preds could make sense. You just probably have to make one cap clearing trade along with the assets that they already have. But Vegas doesn't make any sense for me. Dallas doesn't make too much sense neither, because Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin. Florida, even though we would love to see him in a Florida Panthers sweater, it just seems with the connection that he has to St. Louis that the destination, if I had to predict, is likely going to be St. Louis is going to be that destination for Matthew Tkachuk to end up being in. But this was a fun exercise talking about the possibility of Tkachuk coming to the Florida Panthers, because the fact that, once again, a high-profile player is interested in your team that you cheer for, and those listening to the show, it should get you excited too, even if he doesn't come. And you're probably thinking, why should I be excited even if they don't get him? Is that we've endured a lot of losing for quite a long time with this team, and that there's a little bit of a sense of stability that it's there. They're not going to get their big fish likely this offseason. Not expecting it. A no expectations approach once again. But another big fish signing for the Panthers. This last trade deadline for the Cats, it's not going to be their last big fish trade / signing that the Panthers are going to get. Especially with how especially since still the core of their team is in their prime, and a good majority of their opening night roster from last year is back this year. I got a really good feeling that yes, they'll likely miss out on Tkachuk, but yes, there's another big splash signing or trade on the way for the Panthers sometime in the next year. And I was just looking up the 2023 UFA class coming up next season. There's quite a few big names on there. And today is not the day to necessarily discuss that because we're running out of time. But there will be options for the Panthers there to make something happen. Thank you for listening to this Thursday, July 21st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. For trade proposals for Matthew Tkachuk, feel free to DM at me at LO_FLA Panthers, or even my personal account at MondoMan12, and tell me what your proposed trades would be for the Florida Panthers and the Calgary Flames to bring Matthew Tkachuk here. Again, it has to make sense cap-wise in their present and their future. But hey, give yourself an opportunity to have a little bit of a fun exercise for yourselves in order to just dream a little. Give yourself an opportunity to dream. It's not the worst thing in the world to be able to do that. But send yours over right over here at Locked On Panthers. Tomorrow on Locked On Panthers, we're going to be bringing in Nick Fairbanks of PantherParkway.com for a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show, where we're going to discuss more of the Panthers offseason and play maybe some more what-if scenarios for the Panthers in their past, present, and future of the franchise. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Road, and they'll be covering all the offseason activities around the National Hockey League. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure you listen to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute podcast. So I'm Armando, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.